And I'm the Assistant Cultural Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy, and I am very excited to be here. We have a special guest on today's show, and before I introduce him, I just want to talk a little bit about why we have astronaut Dan Tani talking to us today. Because not only do we have Dan on the program today, we have a number of astronauts who are going to be talking this week and next week. The reason why we're doing this is because of a very important anniversary. This year marks the 45th anniversary of the Apollo-Soyuz docking. So 45 years ago, America's Apollo spacecraft and the Soviet Soyuz docked in space. They launched on July 15th and they docked on July 17th. And that is the very significant day for our two countries, the handshake in space, when Stafford and Leonov shook hands orbiting around our Earth. And that's the first time that two spacecraft from different countries had ever docked. And that was at one of the lowest points in our relationship during the Cold War. So Apollo-Soyuz is very significant, but it proves that anything can happen, anything is possible. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to astronaut Dan Tani, who's gonna talk about his experiences and how he became an astronaut to demonstrate. Dan has been here to Russia, where I am right now, and he'll tell you a little bit about that. And after his talk, we are able to take your questions. So feel free to type your questions in the comments, and we will answer as many of them as we can today. So again, thank you everybody out there in Russia and around the world for who are watching, and welcome Dan Tani.
Damien, thank you very much. And Zdravstvuyte, Dobry den for everybody in Russia that is watching. Thank you for tuning in. It's unbelievable that 45 years ago, the Apollo-Soyuz test program took place. It's quite an honor to be able to memorialize it right now. And as Damien said, not only was it the first docking of two different nations' spacecraft in space, but politically, it was a very significant event, taking two very recent opposing countries and deciding to do something great in space together. And it's very applicable to my career at NASA, because as you'll see on the International Space Station, we have taken that idea of taking two spacecraft from different countries, putting them together, and expanding it to a world-renowned laboratory in space, the International Space Station. So, but let me spend a few minutes telling you my story about how I became an astronaut, or what my journey to becoming an astronaut. I'll expound a little bit about my time in Russia, because I'm very fond of my time in Russia, and then a little bit about what being in space is like, and then we will take as many questions as we can. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, I assume that you can see my screen. My story starts, my heritage is Japanese American, but I was born and raised in the United States. And I was raised in a small town outside of Chicago. If you're familiar, Chicago is sort of right in the middle of the United States. And I would say I was a pretty typical young boy growing up. I loved to play baseball, which is the American pastime. And one of the things I really love to do is fly little rockets. These are rockets that you can build yourself, and they fly hundreds of meters in the air, and it's exciting. And to me, it was amazing that I had the power in my thumb to push the switch, and then the rocket engine would make the thing go really, really high. So that was probably the genesis of my interest in not only space, but also engineering and discovery and exploration. I kind of look back and think that's where it all started. This picture is probably taken around 1975 when I was 14 years old or so. And that's 45 years ago when the Apollo-Soyuz test program was taking place. So even more topical today. I went to public school, meaning that's the state-run school system, and graduated from high school, and then went to university. And for university, I went to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which is in Boston, now on the East Coast of the United States. MIT is pretty famous as an engineering school, much like the Moscow Technical Institute is in Russia. And there I studied mechanical engineering and really, really enjoyed my time there and learned how things work, and got to, as engineering students, you get to break things and try to fix them and learn basically how things work. And it was really a great time. Now, when I graduated from college, from university with a mechanical engineering degree, I went out and found a few jobs in the aerospace field. One of my first jobs was to help build and fly this rocket that I'm standing next to. It's horizontal here because, and what's hard to see in this picture is it's strapped to the bottom of a big airplane. And the airplane takes the rocket up to 40,000 feet and goes about 600 miles an hour and drops the rocket. And now that rocket already has a lot of velocity and a lot of altitude. And so you can get to space pretty efficiently. And that was a really exciting project to be on. I also worked on a payload that flew in the Space Shuttle. And besides being exciting and working in the space program and getting to be up close with the Space Shuttle, the other advantage is I got to be up close and meet some astronauts, and because they were going to deploy our satellite. And I would say that is the moment in my career when the moment for me was I got to meet some astronauts, and I realized they're just people that have a great job. And I never thought of astronauts or cosmonauts as people that just have a job. It's just a really cool job. And so when I realized that, or when of course it makes sense, but when I really felt like, oh, these are just people that had interesting careers and then they applied for the astronaut program and got picked for this particular job, that set a bit in my head. And I thought, you know what, I have a pretty good resume, and, maybe I should send my application in to be an astronaut also. So that's what I did. I sent my application in, just like thousands of other people do. I'm not positive how the Russian space program picks their astronauts, but in the United States, anybody can send in their application. There's just a few requirements, and NASA will go through all those applications and pick the lucky astronauts. Now, in my case, I went through the program, went through the application process several times, and most of the times I got exactly what I expected, which was, no, thank you. We've picked some great people, and and you're not part of that group. But it was my big surprise in 1996 when they picked a very large group of astronauts. We were 35 astronauts in my class who were selected as a class, which is ties for the largest astronaut class ever selected. Plus, we had 9 other international astronauts training with us. So we were a class of 44 astronauts. So we were a very large class, but I was proud to be a member of the class of 1996 and start my career at NASA. Now, at my time at NASA, I was an astronaut for 16 years. I had 3 space missions, three crews that I was a member of. All of them launched on the Space Shuttle, okay? But I'm going to talk about my time in Russia that is not related to the Space Shuttle. My first mission was in 2001 for a couple of weeks, going to the space station and bringing a crew of 3 people to the International Space Station. That's the first time I got to fly with Yuri Onofrenko, and then we brought home Misha Turin and Dezhurov from space. So it was a great time to get to know them. My second mission was in 2007 when we flew up to the space station. This time the job was to drop me off, and I would be a member of the expedition crew. And I would spend 4 months in space on the International Space Station with my commander, Peggy Whitson, an American astronaut, and my crewmate, my Russian crewmate, Yuri Malenchko. And so I get to spend 4 months in orbit with those folks. But one crew that I typically don't talk about, but I'm equally proud of, is that I was a member of a backup crew, the Expedition 11 backup crew. When you hear NASA people talk nowadays about what crews they were on, if they say STS or shuttle crew, that is a crew that went on the space shuttle. We call expedition, we call the people that go live on the space station expedition crew members. And so, and we number them sequentially. So this was the 11th group of astronauts to live on this International Space Station. And as astronauts, of course, we train to go fly in space. And part of that training is to serve as a backup for another crew member, that so in case they get sick or can't go for some reason, we're ready to go all the way up to the launch day if we have to. And so I spent 3 or 4 years of my life being this Expedition 11 backup crew member. And that's when I really got to spend my significant portion of my time in Russia. My crewmates, my backup crewmates, or the crewmates that make up this backup crew are Misha Turin was the commander, and then Bob Thirsk, a Canadian astronaut. And we spent a lot of time together and got to know each other very well during this time. As I said, this is really when I spent most of my time in Russia, and I got to go through the full Soyuz Russian training, and just the same training that the cosmonauts go through. And it was so interesting and so unique. There are things that are much different than the way we do things in the United States. This is winter survival, where they put a capsule. The scenario is we've landed someplace in who knows where, could be Siberia, and in the winter, and we have to survive so that the rescue forces can get us in a day or 2 days, and we have to survive for those couple of days, and we learn everything about winter survival and everything that we need to do to the spacecraft, and all the resources in the spacecraft we can use to keep us alive. That's Pasha Vinogradov, who was my commander for this particular training. So as a backup crew member, I got to do everything the real crew members do, which just includes go down to Baikonur and visit our real spacecraft and get inside and make sure that everything is the way we expect it to be. And this is quite an honor to sit next to the spacecraft that would fly my prime crew member, not me, because I didn't make the trip, but to actually be up close to the actual Soyuz spacecraft. Being in Baikonur was a real treat for me, and it is so steeped in history. Of course, that's where Yuri Gagarin launched the first human in space, and so I really had a wonderful couple weeks leading up to the launch, learning all the history and seeing the sites around Baikonur. It's so cool when you go to Baikonur and you see your Soyuz rocket being wheeled out of the assembly building and being put on the launch pad, and still as a backup crew member, you're not absolutely positive that you're not going to go. Anything could happen to your prime guy, so you treat it like you're going to really this really could be your rocket, and but it's so exciting and it's so unique for us astronauts to see the rocket being rolled out and actually walk right up and almost be able to touch it. I happened to be down in Kazakhstan, or Baikonur, on Space Day, or Yuri Gagarin's Day, April 12th. And so we went around and honored the memory and the legacy of Yuri Gagarin, and got to go visit one of his statues right in the middle of Baikonur. And that was quite an honor for me also. One of the huge events for me being a backup crew member is I got to spend the day with some VIPs, the launch day with some VIPs. And I really treasure this photograph. Sitting on my left, or on the far right of this picture, is Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman ever to launch in space. And it was such an honor to meet her. And she was so lively and so full of life. It was a real pleasure to spend some time with her. And then behind me, on your far left here, is Alexey Leonov. Now, when I met him, he's a hero of mine because he was the first human to walk in space or to perform a spacewalk. I've have a handful of spacewalks in my career. It is really hard work. And to think about the first person to ever do it, and it's so difficult. And there were so many unknowns. There's still some unknowns. There were so many unknowns. What a brave man to take that task and to accomplish it. So that was a real honor for me. And then, of course, right now with this 45th anniversary of the Apollo-Soyuz mission, Alexey Leonov was the commander on the Soyuz side. And so it's equally, or it's more applicable even today to show you this picture. And then I spent a lot of time, of course, in Zhyozhny Gorod at the Cosmonaut training center there. And since I was there for weeks at a time, I would come into Moscow and see the great sights. And on my final long trip, I got to bring my family with my then 6-month-old daughter and really enjoy Moscow, the people and the food and the culture. It is an indelible part of my personality. I really enjoy and miss actually my time in Russia. Okay, but that was my backup crew, and I never got to fly on this Soyuz, but I did get to do all the training. My flights were on the Space Shuttle, and so I thought I'd show you a little bit about what it's like to fly on the Space Shuttle. The Space Shuttle, if you're familiar, that's the thing that looks like the big airplane here, and we launch it out of Florida at the Kennedy Space Center, and to get that huge piece of machinery going 17,000 or 28,000 kilometers an hour takes a lot of force. And so the force that we use are big rocket engines on the back of the shuttle that get fed fuel from that big orange fuel tank. And then to get the extra boost off the planet, we have those two white cylinders that are bolted to the fuel tank. Those are called solid rocket motors. And those are huge versions of those little motors that I used to fly when I was 15 years old on my little model rockets. And I thought you might be interested in seeing what a launch looks like.
17 seconds.
And I assume that there's a little audio here, so I assume you can hear that. You can see the coast of Florida behind us. We're right on the coast of Florida. And now inside, everything is shaking like crazy. It is an exciting ride. And you can see me, I've got a mirror and I can see through the window up above me. I can see the Earth getting smaller and smaller. The coast of Florida getting smaller and smaller as we accelerate faster and faster and get pushed into space. Now, after about 2 minutes, those solid rocket boosters are done with their fuel. And so we want to release those so that we don't carry the heavy casings all the way into space. And so at 2 minutes and a few seconds, they separate. And then for the next 6 minutes, the engines on the space shuttle fed fuel using fuel from the orange space tank, accelerate us faster and faster into space until we're eventually going 28,000 kilometers an hour, which means that we're circling the Earth every 90 minutes. It's quite an amazing ride. So where did we go? Well, in my time frame, we've gone to the International Space Station. As I said in the beginning, the International Space Station is sort of the result of the work that was done in the Apollo-Soyuz test program. We take spacecraft that are built from different nations, not only Russia and the United States, but also Canada and Japan and the European Space Agency. And we put them together in space for the very first time, and it has to work and work perfectly. And it really has done a fantastic job. When I think about Apollo-Soyuz and I think about the International Space Station, I think not only is it a remarkable technological achievement, but it really says something about how a project like this can transcend politics and be more important than the differences that our governments might have. And so day to day, right now, this International Space Station has to function, and it requires that the governments of Russia and the United States and all the European nations and Japan and Canada and Brazil all agree and coordinate and understand that this is we have to run this program, and it requires cooperation from all these governments, and it has worked fantastically. So I just thought I'd show you a little bit about the inside of the space station. The best part for me of being on the space station was the ability to fly like Superman. Of course, there are no gravitational forces, and so you have to learn this whole new skill of getting around the space station, and you get to learn how to fly, and it is more fun than you can imagine. Here's a little tour of the space station from one end to the other. There's Yuri Malenchko, my Russian crew member. Uh-oh, it just froze on my end. Okay, I'm going to keep talking as if it's going, but it froze on my end. Here we go through. This is the Russian part of the International Space Station. These are the parts that are built by Russia. This is what's called the functional cargo block, or a storage room, basically. And oh yeah, there's no ceiling and there's no floor in the space station, since everything floats. And so it doesn't matter which way your head is or which way your feet are. Now we're going to go into the parts of the space station that were built by the United States and some of the European and Japanese partners. And there's a spacesuit going by, and there's some emergency oxygen. This is my commander, Peggy Whitson, working out on the bicycle in our laboratory module. There's a window down there that you can't see. What's really cool is that if you bike for 90 minutes, you can go all the way around the Earth, 25,000 miles around the Earth. So it's a pretty good workout. And then here we're ending up in the new module that we had just brought up on my space shuttle flight. It's called the Node 2. And after I left, they put more modules on that Node 2. In fact, right here, what you're facing is a hatch that the brand new Crew Dragon just docked to about 2 months ago, I guess. And that's the port where our brand new spacecraft will dock to the space station. When we work on the space station, we do a lot of work on the inside to make sure that it's working and we do repairs, etc. Every once in a while, we have to go outside. And in fact, when I flew, we installed this brand new module that's on the right side of your picture. And to install it, we have to go out, and there's a lot of things on the outside we have to hook up. So Peggy and I did a series of 5 spacewalks, a couple of them to hook up the new module, but a couple of them to fix things that broke on the outside that we had to go out and fix. And doing a spacewalk is amazing. Put this big, heavy spacesuit on, you throw the switches, and you put your helmet on, and now you are your own little spacecraft for the next 8 or 9 hours. And it's amazing to go out in space and float and look at the entire, not only the space station, but the beautiful Earth rotating below you. And it really gives you a sense of, for me at least, a sense of awe that what an amazing location I'm able to call my workplace and my home for those 4 months. Here's a picture of me on my spacewalk, and it is hard work doing a spacewalk. It's exhausting and it's mentally draining. You have to pretty much remember everything you need to do, and you need to be talking to the ground all the time, and you have to monitor your spacesuit because that's what's keeping you alive. And then you also have to do all the work that you're being asked to do. Oh, and don't drop anything. So that's a big thing. Don't drop anything. And so that takes a lot of energy, mental energy also. So I lived for 4 months on the space station, but that means that I lived for 4 months, and I just happened to do it on the space station. So almost everything that happens in your life during that time happens to you in space. And here's an example: your hair grows and you got to cut your hair. I think, at least in the United States, most of us right now are pretty familiar with having to figure out how to deal with your hair over the several months of not being able to go to a barber. I don't know how things are in Russia right now, but a lot of us are suffering from not seeing a barber. Well, in the space station, we have a special hair cutter where we can cut our hair. And the hair cutter is attached to that big tube, and that tube goes to the vacuum cleaner. Because if you think about it, as soon as you cut that little piece of hair, if you didn't suck it into the vacuum cleaner, it would float all around and you'd make a mess. And what I didn't know the first time I cut my hair is that my hair is very thick and that tube clogged up. And I didn't realize it, but all of my little bits of hair were floating around the space station, and I was very unpopular. I was the most unpopular guy on the space station that day. And I had to clean up my mess and spent a lot of time finding all those little bits of hair and cleaning it up. Here's a view of my little living quarter. Now, when I was on the space station, I actually lived in the Russian part of the space station. They have 2 little bedrooms, kayuta, back in this Russian section. Nowadays, they have 4 little bedrooms, living quarters in the United States segment, and then the 2 kayuta in the Russian segment. So I spent most of my time in the kayuta. You can see how small it is, and we put there's room for a sleeping bag and a computer so we can do email and watch movies and put some trinkets on the wall, and just give you a little sense of what our life is like, at least sleeping our little bedrooms are like on the space station. Lots of people are interested in what and how we eat in space. And so here's a little demonstration. The food that we get is in containers. The blue ones are from the United States program. The red ones are from the Russian program. And we're allowed to eat whichever one we want. We find delicious favorites on both sides. I'm making some borscht here, one of my favorite Russian foods, or foods from the Russian program. You can see our dining room table there. There's my spoon kind of floating back and forth. We just use tape to hold those down when we're not using them. And then I'm putting warm water into the bag of freeze-dried borscht. And then after a few minutes, you use scissors to clip off the other end, and there's a straw, and you can enjoy your snack. Here's Yuri and Peggy sitting around the dining table. Peggy was a great commander. She made sure that the 3 of us ate dinners together, regardless of how busy we were, because it's really important as a crew, much like as a family, to spend time together. And mealtime is probably the most important time to be together. Here's Yuri playing with his food. Yuri is such an experienced space flyer. I think he has the record for total number of time in space. I think he's had 2 more missions to the space station after mine. I know that lots of you have these questions, so we might as well talk about it now, and that's, how do you go to the bathroom in space? And so first of all, as I said, everything that happens on the ground happens in space. And so your body works just like it does on the ground. You eat just as much, and then of course you have to deal with the bathroom. So, however, we don't have gravitational forces to help us out, and gravity is a big help. If you ever want to appreciate gravity in your life, think about it in the bathroom and how it helps you, because gravity really is what pulls the waste away from your body. Well, we don't have that on the space station, and so we use airflow. And here's our toilet, and you can see that hose with the yellow funnel, and you take the cap off the funnel and turn a switch, and a fan pulls air through that hose, and that's what pulls the liquid waste away from your body. And then that same fan, if you lift that white lid, if you open that lid, there's a pretty small hole, about this big, and that goes into a can, and that pulls air through, air gets pulled through that can also, and that's what pulls the solid waste away from your body. And it works great. It is easy technology, but boy, it's really needed, and we're grateful that it works virtually all the time, and it's easy to fix if something goes wrong. Here's just a little shot of me playing around with my friend Leland Melvin. He he was part of the crew that came to pick me up on the Space Shuttle Atlantis. And so he's been up in space for a couple of days. I've been there for a few months, and I'm just showing him some of my fun things. Like, here's my favorite snack, which is a tortilla with peanut butter and some chocolate in it. And then, all of our water has to be in bags, because if it's not in a bag, it'll do this, which is sort of create a ball of water. And you don't really want that most of the time, unless you're going to experiment and play around with it. So he's squeezing the water bag, and now you can see, first of all, the air bubbles inside the water bubble, which is really interesting. You can't get that on Earth. And then now you can see the surface tension of that water bubble, trying to make that a perfect sphere, unless it gets eaten first. As I said, I launched on the Space Shuttle. I spent 4 months on the space station, and then the next crew on the Space Shuttle came and picked me up and brought me home after 4 months. And here I'm touching the Earth for the first time in 4 months. The Space Shuttle, an amazing vehicle. It launches out of the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, goes around the world, 5 million miles or so over a couple of weeks. And then it lands 3 miles from where it took off, also at the Kennedy Space Center. It's an amazing vehicle. Here I'm feeling the full effects of Earth's gravity for the first time. So I'm a little bummed out that my time in zero G or weightlessness is over. But I'm really excited, because a couple hours after we land, I get to see what I've been waiting for. And that's my wife and my now 2 daughters, 3. And just in case you're interested, we've added a boy since then. So a little bit more of a fair fight in the house. But out of my 120-day mission, I consider this to be the best day of them all. So that's all I had to show you about my mission, and maybe it spurs a bunch of, or my career. Maybe it'll spur some questions and things we can talk about. I'm going to unshare my screen here, and I'm happy to take as many questions as I possibly can.
Thanks, Dan. That was absolutely amazing. That was a great story. Love the videos, love your comments, love to see you here in Russia. We've got a whole bunch of people across Russia asking questions, so I'm just going to jump into it. There's a girl named Daria who says, is there anything that still amazes you? Can anything really compare to going to space?
Daria, great question. Things continually amaze me. And I think, like most, well, here's what amazes me. When my son, 10-year-old son, says something that I think, how did he think of that? How does he know that? There are things that my children do that amaze me, because the way your brain works and the way it develops and the way people think, that's astounding. Okay, we can build a rocket. That's metal and whatever. You screw it together, and that makes sense to me. The way your brain develops ideas and how new things appear, that really amazes me. When I look at the night sky and I think about the sheer distance of what things, how far those stars are away, that amazes me. Another thing about the night sky, I like to go out and I look at the planets because they're relatively easy to find. And then I think about 400 years ago, when the early astronomers, or the astronomers of that time, would try to figure out what's going on out there. How come the moon moves this way and Venus moves that way? And they figured it out. And they figured it out with pencil and paper, and some, right around the time of the telescope. And so some didn't have telescopes. So I am constantly amazed by mostly human endeavors, how humans work, the amazing things that they can do, the amazing things, the way my kids are learning. And so those are the types of things that still amaze me. But of course, I am constantly amazed, and I'm privileged to have flown to space, and it is a momentous part of my career and my life. But it's not, honestly, there are many other momentous parts of my life and my career.
Great. Dan, we've got a question from Helen. There's a couple questions similar to Helen's, but I'll ask Helen's. Do you want to work with Elon Musk? What's your opinion about SpaceX?
That's a great question, Helen. Elon is this world needs Elon Musk and other people like him. He was a dreamer. He is a dreamer, and he imagines things that most people write off. When he said 10 years ago, I'm going to land a rocket back at the launch pad. I'm going to launch it. You know, these things are expensive. What you do is you throw them away in the ocean. That's what every other rocket has done since. I'm going to fly mine back so I can use it again. And I would have bet a lot of money that he could never do it. And of course, he does it. He's done it many, many times. And now it's part of what he does with SpaceX. So I am really happy that he exists, because you need those very bold dreamers and those very creative imagination people out there. And I'd put him in the category with Steve Jobs, and there must be others around the world that they're so creative that you need them to push the boundary of what can be done. Would I like to work for him? SpaceX is an incredibly exciting company, and frankly, right now for me and where I am in my career, they work really, really, really hard and nonstop. They devote their entire lives, as far as I can tell, because that's where they are in their lives, those engineers. And so I have other priorities in my life. And so I am really glad that Elon and SpaceX and companies like them and people like them exist. But I'm going to let the younger guys do all the hard work.
We've got a question from Arena, and she asks, what are your favorite experiments on the ISS? What is your favorite module on the ISS?
Let's see, Arena. Let's see. I lived in the service module, the Russian service module, so I really like that I felt like that was my home when I was there. And then I brought up it's called the Node 2 Harmony module. And so I have a soft spot in my heart for that, because I worked outside of it a lot and inside of it a lot. Let's see, it just escaped me the first part of the question.
Favorite experiment.
Your favorite experiment? Well, the things I like about the experiments there are things that I never really thought about until we had the experiments. One really interesting experiment is, what does a flame do without gravity? Now, here on Earth, we light a match or we light a candle, and if this is the flame, the top of the flame is a lot hotter than the bottom of the flame. That's how it works. And because there's a difference in the temperature from the bottom to the top, okay, what happens is air that gets near it heats up, and as we know, hot things rise, okay, so it goes up, okay, so there's this constant air circulation around a flame, because the air gets less dense and it gets more buoyant and it rises, okay? Anytime we say the word buoyant, we mean gravity, okay? You need gravity, okay? Well, in space, if you have a flame, this still may be hotter than this, but there's no force that's moving the air around it. So actually what you get is a ball of flame. It's symmetric. There's no up and there's no down. And in a perfectly still environment, even around air, the air won't be pulled in. And so the flame may extinguish itself. We don't know. And so I think one of the most interesting experiments that we're doing on the space station is, how do flames react? And how do things that are on fire react? And so those are questions that I'd never even thought about until we started talking about the experiments that we were doing in space. I'm going to mention one other thing, and it's not a true experiment, but one of the things we do on the space station, one of the things we're trying to find out on the space station, is how we're going to live for years and years going to Mars, okay, away from the planet. And one of the big things that we have to figure out is how do we take the astronauts that are going to space station or Mars or further, and how do we make them feel connected to their family and their families connected to them? If we think that's important, and I think most of us do, we have to figure out, how do we allow them to communicate? How do we allow them to express their good feelings and bad feelings and keep those human relationships between the spacecraft and their whole other life on Earth. And so we do that on the space station all the time, and we're constantly thinking about how do we make sure that they are happy up in space, and almost more importantly, that their families and loved ones are happy on the Earth while their loved ones are in space. So I think of that as an experiment. I think it's really, really important.
Great. We've got another question. We've got a question from Tammy. Actually, she has two really good ones. First one is, did you lose any bone mass during those 4 months? And then the second question is about Russian. Did you speak Russian while in space?
Sure. Bone mass, that's the big concern, because I didn't know it before I became an astronaut, but your bones are constantly everybody's bones are constantly losing calcium here on Earth or everywhere. And what happens is your body is really smart. And when you put force on your bones, the bone says, hey, I need more calcium here. And so it regenerates. And so you have this automatic feedback, which is if there's force on your bones, then as you lose calcium, your body adds calcium back and makes them strong. That's why your leg bones are bigger than your arm bones, because we stand up on our legs. In space, without gravitational forces, your bones are having an easy job. So they lose calcium, but there's no feedback to add all that stuff back, add the calcium back. And so, yes, we lose bone mass. What we've done, though, is we figured out, well, we need to figure out how to get that feedback mechanism working. And so we do a lot of exercise in space. We do about 2 hours a day. And what's best for your bones is basically a weightlifting regime. We don't lift weights because it's weightlessness, but we push against big springs basically. And so we can do what you would think of as weightlifting, and that puts force all on your body, just like you would here on Earth, and that keeps our bones strong. So in my case, I lost just a small bit of bone density. We do a full scan before we go and when we come back. And so we think that protocol is really effective. And I just lost a very small amount of bone mass. And once I got back to Earth, I quickly got back to my baseline level. Great question. Russian. I tell people that the hardest part of training as an astronaut for me was learning Russian. And I've never been a language guy. And I had 5 years of Russian language lessons. And I remember the most nervous I was on the space station there was a time when I was asked to change filters on the Russian part of the space station. And so that requires talking to Moscow, the Moscow Control Center, SUP. And of course, I have to do it in Russian. And so, I practice, okay, I've completed the zakonchos, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I can't even remember now. And so I'd rehearse it and practice, and I'd press the microphone, and I can't say, So I remember being so nervous, having to talk to Moscow in my very kindergarten Russian. And Yuri Malenchko is fantastic. His English is so good. Most of the cosmonauts' English is so good. It's humiliating or humbling for me that we have to go into my language. But we tried using Russian around the dinner table, and it was just so difficult. It wasn't worth it for me. It wasn't worth it for him. And so we were able to speak English on the space station my whole time. But I still hold on to a couple Russian phrases and words. And, I haven't been able to, I have not been back to Russia for years. And so I haven't been able to use it unless I meet somebody from Russia. But I wish I was better. And unfortunately, I am not. Ya gulupsi.
We've got a question from Matvey, and he asks, does interpersonal compatibility is taken into account when the ISSQ crews are being formed?
And I'm sorry, what was his name?
Matvey.
Absolutely fantastic question. Now, when we were launching rockets for a couple missions for a couple weeks, Space Shuttle, even before that, Gemini and Apollo, I think the personality compatibility issue was not thought of very much. And I have heard some stories of crews that have gone to space for a couple weeks, did not get along, didn't do well. didn't enjoy themselves personally because they just didn't get along very well. What a shame. But that inconvenience could be a real showstopper for long duration missions of months at a time. And so absolutely, not only, well, we start back when we pick astronauts now. I can't speak for the Russian program, but for the United States, when NASA picks astronauts, one of the biggest things we look for is the ability for new recruits to get along with other people, to do well in uncomfortable situations, to understand that they're a part of a crew, and the crew, that success of the crew depends on getting along. And so we used to have a psychiatrist assess every candidate, but their vote, they didn't have a vote. But nowadays in the space station, they do. The psychologists, psychiatrists do get a vote into who gets selected and who does not. And then once they get selected as astronauts, we do a lot of training about getting together, teamwork, conflict resolution, all these things that are important interpersonal skills. And so, when you pick the best engineers and scientists and doctors and physicists, you don't think, okay, you don't think that those are the people that are going to excel at interpersonal skills. But we find it important, and we find people that have really great skills in getting along, understanding, being empathetic. Of course, in this environment, the international aspects, so respecting and even cherishing differences in political views, religious views, nationalistic views. I think that we learn to appreciate them and think, this is really cool that they think so much differently than me. And I don't agree, but it's so interesting, and I value that they have that opinion, and maybe there's something I can learn from it. So that's a great question. And yes, it is very important right now. And it will be more important when we send people again to Mars, which is like a 3 or 4 year mission. So we'll have to learn about that.
Great. We got a question from Tatiana, and she wants to know, what were your feelings during your first space flights? And then someone else asked a similar question: what was it like when you first looked back down at Earth?
Tatiana, it's those are the moments that I tried to lock into my brain, because we astronauts and cosmonauts get to do something that so few humans do, and we feel it's our job to come back and explain it, or do what we can to bring that experience to people that aren't able to go. My emotions on my, as I think about that first hour in space, being launched and accelerated into orbit, and then enjoying or experiencing what it's like to be in orbit for the first time. It was full of, first of all, my head was absolutely full, because we train and train and train. So there's a million things to remember, and I'm trying to remember all million things. And so there's the job to be done, which is all consuming in terms of your mental process. But I'm there with some great friends, people I've trained with for years, and so we look at each other, and my pilot on my first flight was the first time flyer. He's in my class also, so we were sharing these looks and these comments about how incredible it was. I do remember floating to the window for the first time and looking down at the Earth for the first time. When I was maybe 25 years old or so, those huge movies called IMAX movies came out, where you can go and you're almost surrounded by the screen. And one of the first things that those IMAX movies showed was being in space. And they would have these amazing views of what it's like to be, what it looks like, the Earth looks like from space. And those were, just awesome. If you get a chance, you should, go see those. When I looked out the window for the first time and saw, I think we were over Europe, my first view out the window, my first thought was, this is just like that IMAX movie. I mean, it was funny that I related it to the representation, the film that I had seen. But you look down at the world, and whenever I looked at the world, we're 400 kilometers away. So we can't see cars. We can see, if you look really hard, you can see an airport because the runways are pretty big, but we see very little human activity on the Earth during the day. And so you look down at the Earth and you see a mountain range, and if you've done some research, or if you know your history a little bit, you think, the people on that side of the mountain range hate the people on the other side of the mountain range, or this river, or there's a boundary down there and they can't, there's a real conflict there. And you think, but all I see is this beautiful Earth. And we see mountains and rivers and coastlines. And for that moment, you think, I constantly thought, what a beautiful planet I live on. But for that moment, you forget, or you're allowed to forget, the conflict and the pain and the suffering that's happening down there, because we live on such a beautiful planet. The emotions I had that I brought back with me from space are what an honor it is to be a citizen of this beautiful planet, the most beautiful planet we've ever seen. And I and the other 8 billion people should feel so lucky that we get to live here and call it our home. So it's that you've touched on, for me, what's the most emotional thing about being in space and looking at the window and feeling ownership of our home planet.
Thank you for that. We have Arena has a question. She is 15 years old, and she says, I want to become an astronaut. What can I do to start preparing right now?
Arena, you're at the perfect age. Well, let's see. I can't speak for the Russian astronaut selection process, but I'll talk about in general, what do I think makes a great cosmonaut or astronaut? And I guess, of course, I think you're going to want a good educational background. Okay, I say of course because, I think that's assumed. You have to do well in school and you have to do well in college. For the NASA program in America, you have to have a degree in engineering, science, or mathematics. I don't know about the Russian program. I assume it's similar. But what you can really start doing to separate yourself from all the other people that are doing really well in science or engineering is what I said before, which is learn to embrace other cultures. I think speaking other languages right now would be a real benefit. I apologize. I don't, that's not me, but I would think going forward, speaking other languages would be very important. It sounds to me like your English is already excellent, so that's a really good start. I think traveling and learning about other parts of the world and sort of, again, enjoying other cultures and the differences that people have, instead of being afraid of them or thinking that makes us different, or thinking of the negative parts of our differences. I think being positive and embracing those is really important, and will put your mind at the right mindset to be part of a team, which is exactly what's going to be required for the astronauts and cosmonauts of the future. And I always say, learn how to stand up and speak in front of a crowd. We spend so much of our time talking to people, talking to either 10 people or 10,000 people. It does well if you're not nervous, or if that's fine for you. And so practice that as much as you can. I think those are the types of things that will really help you stand out when you eventually apply to be a cosmonaut or an astronaut. So good luck to you. I think you've got a really good start.
Great, wonderful. Thanks for those words. I think we have time for one more.
Okay.
And this one comes from Jian. And Jian asks, before you met with Russian cosmonauts, what kind of stereotypes did you have? And can you tell us about how you came to understand who Russians really are?
Jian, that is an awesome question. Let's see. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. And so we were in a difficult situation with the Soviet Union at that time, politically. And so the media did a job on me, as I imagine they did on the Soviet citizens, which is to, I don't know, demean or make fun of, or, you know, lessen the people on the other side. Maybe that wasn't intentional, but there are stereotypes. So that's what I grew up with. And then while I was working for NASA, we started this shuttle mirror program in cooperation with the cosmonauts. And then went to NASA, and of course I got to meet the cosmonauts. So what were my stereotypes? My stereotypes before spending time in Russia and getting to know the cosmonauts were that Russians were fiercely loyal to Russia, Soviet Union, their leaders. The sort of a communist model, sort of blindly following their leaders, and so that was sort of what I my very young self sort of expected. Meeting the so Russia does a great job of picking their cosmonauts because, without exception, they're personable, they're friendly, they are life lovers, they enjoy getting together. I think that's a really Russian trait now. The communal experience, sitting around a table and talking for hours and eating zakushki and there may be a beverage involved, but they are so typically great people that enjoy fellowship, that enjoy communication, that enjoy being together, and so when I get to work with the cosmonauts, what was eye-opening is that they sit around, and we sit around. We talk about how much we disagree with our government and our leadership, and they do the same, and they complain about whatever the prices or the policies or the things that in Russia that really bother them. And what I appreciate and what I took from them is that we Americans, I think we complain and it gets to us and we get angry about it, and it ruins the mood. And what I've noticed in Russia, at least in my experience, is those Russian cosmonauts have the same complaints, have the same issues, but it rolls right over them. And it's sort of like, oh, well, let's enjoy life anyway. And I think I had a lot to learn. I think we Americans might learn a lot from that attitude. One of the amazing things in my career, right where I was in this time, is I flew in space with Russians, with Italians, with Germans, with French men, and they used to be our enemies. We used to, fight wars with those nationalities. But now I call them crewmates, friends, lifelong comrades, and so I always think that's a great metaphor, great story about how spaceflight is not only removing boundaries between people, but strongly forming connections across them. Where he's not a Russian to me; he's a crewmate. He's a really great drug, right? And so I like that. And that's not just happening to the astronauts and cosmonauts. That's happening to all the engineers and doctors and people that are working together on this international endeavor. But that's a really great question, and I have not spent as much time probably thinking about how my thoughts and opinions and attitudes towards not only the Russians but other nationalities has changed. But it's a good thing to start being insightful about. So that's a great question.
Thank you so much. And before we let you go, I'm going to just put in a plug for the next talk. So if you enjoyed talking to Dan and listening to his stories, we have many more talks with astronauts. So let's just take a look right here. So if you want to talk to another astronaut on Thursday, Catherine Coleman is going to be available, and she's going to answer questions about how to survive during these quarantine times. She'll be talking about some of her advice that can help anybody who is self-isolating and quarantining at home. And then next Monday, we're going to have another talk with astronaut Marcia Ivins, and she's going to be giving a history of the Space Shuttle, which Dan flew on. That's very close to his heart, and she'll be talking about that. So we've got at least 2 more talks. We're working on a third for the 15th, and we'll have a very special event on the actual anniversary of Apollo-Soyuz on the 17th. So we have a whole bunch more talks. So I'm going to give the floor back to Dan to say goodbye and say any last words or thoughts to the wonderful people here in Russia.
Sure. First of all, those are great astronauts you got coming up, and you should ask Katie about music. She's an excellent musician, and she's a flautist, and really enjoyed that on the space station. And then Marcia is known in the astronaut Corps as one of the best bakers, cooks. She makes fantastic, delicious pastries and cookies, and so you can talk to her about those. I just want to say thank you so much for your attention and your time. It makes me miss Russia and my time in Russia very much. One of the questions I get even now is, what do what foods do you miss, or what do you miss about being on the space station? And I always come back to dvork. We had 2 different types of dvork on the space station, one in a can and one powdered, and you add water to it. You can't get anything like that in the United States. It was the thing I would look forward to at mealtime. If I could crack open a can of dvork and put some fruit on there or something, I loved it. So anyway, I have very fond memories of my time in Russia and with my Russian cosmonaut friends. And so I wish you all the best. As a world, we got to get past this COVID thing, and we got to keep our focus, and worldwide, we need to make sure that we can get rid of this thing and figure out how to get back to what we desperately want to be a more normal life. So good luck to all of you, and I really look forward to my next visit to Russia. I don't know when that'll be, but I really miss it a lot. So wonderful to talk with you. Thank you for your attention, and congratulations on the 45th anniversary of the Apollo-Soyuz test program.
Thank you, Dan. You're welcome here in Russia anytime. We hope to see you here in person.
Отлично.